I'm
How
doing
are
all
you?
right. I'm doing all right. How are y'all?
Doing well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes. It's really exciting to be here.
Glad to have you.
Okay.
Do you want to do a highs and lows before we start, or?
I think we should. Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a DASC meeting. So we're going to do highs and lows. So like, something that's something that you're really happy about this week and something that's like not so great that happened this week. Cool. Why don't you start us off?
Okay, so like I was saying before, I'm really excited that my priest outfit came in. When I tried it on, like my roommate was studying, so I like got like in the like right near him and just and see like how long it would take him to. And he like started laughing when he saw the outfit. He's like, this is like for Halloween, right?" I'm like, "Yes." So that was a fun time. Unfortunately, the busiest part of my week is over with. I had a math test yesterday, so went pretty decent. Went well, I'd say. So that's definitely my high. I think low is just stressing over the election because it's so soon.
Oh, no.
But yeah, that's been my low for several weeks now. So and
Honestly, yeah. I feel
I
you.
will pass it on to Caroline.
Hey, not to be political on Maine, but like all of the election news and all of the Supreme Court news has kind of just bummed me out. I'm a government major for those of you that don't know, so like I have to study this all the time. So when it like just takes over my entire personal life, that's kind of a bummer. But like hopefully,
I think that's just being a UT student.
hopefully it will be over soon. Not over, but like maybe a little bit of a fraction of a bit better. And my high is I'm officially finished with midterms, and so I think they all went relatively well, and I'm just excited to be finished with them. And I'm gonna pass it to Jess because she's sitting right here.
My high for this week has probably been the weather. It being cold and being able to wear sweaters again is the best. And my low is I've been watching The Bachelorette and it's literally painful to watch. It's too cringe. I hate it, but I can't stop watching. It's like watching a car crash.
Yeah, no, I love The Bachelorette.
Yeah, I started watching it last weekend because y'all were talking about it.
It's
Like
painful.
The first
No.
episode, I was like, this is like why I don't like men. I mean, like I like men, but like, I mean, like. Yeah, it's an interesting episode.
What are your highs and lows, Abigail?
For me, my high is I had a meeting today because I'm in a creative writing class and I wrote a short story and I'm very like particular with my writing and I hated this short story and I was literally just like I never even want to read this piece again, like it sucked so bad, like I can't even like read it, it's terrible. And then I had a meeting with the professor and he was like, actually, like I really like this and like I think you have like a really good idea for a plot and all this stuff. So now I'm like, okay, like I could do something with this. So that's exciting. And then my low is I think I'm gonna have the same low as Cole, which is just the election. Everything that's happening with the Supreme Court or happened with the Supreme Court and just the tension last week of early voting. All of that is a lot.
Mm-hmm. All right. Why don't you pass it on?
I have another quick high. Apparently, Texas is in swing state status right now, which makes me really excited.
No, for real?
Yeah, for real.
This is the first time.
It's not it's gone like in and out of swing state status, especially in like 2018 for Senate and stuff, but right now it's like close enough to be considered like a swing, so.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting.
Okay, sorry, continue.
Oh, that stresses me. Like it's like exciting, but it's also like, oh my god. What a year.
Why don't you pass it on to someone, Abigail?
Oh, I'll pass it to Jasmine.
Hi y'all, my name's Jasmine. I saw a couple of you at, though I don't think y'all saw me at the like panel. I can't remember if it was like a webinar, like, or like a Zoom call. There's so many of them. My low is, you know, dealing with everything that's happening in the world on top of like, or my program right now, we have like interviews for like our, like an internship process, like on the week of election. And I'm like, why would y'all do this? So that's definitely a low, a lot of things happening there. But then like a high was, there was like the policy like thing that was, so like I'm in social work, and there was like a policy thing that was like social workers can like discriminate against like people with disabilities and like queer people, and that was really upsetting, but it was overturned. So that was my high. So basically like a thing that we thought was going to be a really big problem is like, I don't, it's still a problem that it even happened in the first place. But I'm glad that at least like social workers can't choose who to serve now. Like, I don't know. So that's a high.
Wait, that's amazing. Like last week, Dr. Nick just told us about that.
Yeah.
Wait, so they just overturned it?
Yeah, because basically like what happened is they got so much backlash that
They should, as they should.
and from like all sorts of people, right? And also social workers, which I have some opinions about how social workers handled the campaign, but I will keep them to myself for now. But anyways, but it's, I'm really glad that it's no longer a thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Okay. You can popcorn it to someone.
Okay, Tamara?
Yeah, my high is I finally had time to cook rice. Here, still super warm. My low is I've been sick for like the past 2 weeks. It's not COVID. I don't know what. I think it's like gastritis. I've been vomiting a lot. So
Oh no.
still dealing with that. That's pretty much it. Cole, have you gone?
Oh, wait,
Yes, I have.
Okay.
I have not gotten.
Okay, so you go ahead, Megan.
I think my low is also I think everyone's like the election and just how everything is being dealt with the news. But my high is Halloween is coming up, so I'm just excited. Like I'm not doing anything, but I'm just excited. But yeah, thank you all for coming. So today we're going to talk about the intersectionality between disability and race. Ooh. Cole, why don't you share your screen, please?
Let's see here. Do I have host capabilities? Okay, let's see here. Okay,
Oh,
yes, I
wait.
do. Yes, I should be good.
You should,
Okay,
yeah.
let me, it just might take a second to do this. My apologies. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so, okay, here we are. Disability and race. So one of the first things that we thought
Okay,
of,
cool.
oh, sorry?
I don't, could you share your screen, please?
Oh, no, is it not started? My apologies. I was too involved there. Okay. There we are. Okay, are we good now?
Yes.
Am I ready to see my screen? Okay, fantastic. So one of the first things that we thought about in terms of disability and race was really the lack of racial inclusion within the disability rights movement, particularly when it comes to the ADA. Actually, it was interesting because during the disability and feminism conversation, I'm not sure if it was Jasmine who said this, but or one of the other speakers, but it like really hit home with Natalie and me that the ADA is most beneficial to white men, particularly those of like wealthier backgrounds. That comes about because when we look at disability in general, when it comes to race, and also how that ties into socioeconomic status, usually those who are white and wealthy have the ability to have health insurance and the ability to be properly have a proper medical diagnosis when it comes to disability. So we do see that a lot of people of color and a lot of marginalized racial groups who don't necessarily have that same access can't afford to have diagnoses. And also another way in which the ADA is most beneficial to, white men or white males would be kind of opportunities in employment. Of course, racism definitely is still a major issue when it comes to employment, and when that's compounded with disability, that also kind of adds to issues of access to proper, like those opportunities in employment. And one of the other things that I kind of thought of is how people really tend to view disability through a white racial lens. I mean, like even like depictions in media, most often I've seen throughout my life, usually it's, if there's a focus on disability, it's usually a focus on white men in particular. So that's certainly problematic in not being able to understand or fully acknowledge how race impacts people's experience with disabilities and vice versa. And there, and continuing along those lines, we see that white voices tend to dominate spaces on disability discourse. And there's certainly areas where, people like white people in particular aren't comfortable talking about race when it comes to people of color bringing up those topics in disability discussions, because those, of course, are so valuable to understand and being able to fully comprehend disability experience. And going along the lines of wealth as well, we see there's certainly a resource allocation disparity between different races, particularly when we're looking at children and their parents. Those who are white and wealthy, again, tend to kind of not necessarily hog, it's not the best word to use, but tend to hoard, if you will, the different resources and support services for people with disabilities. And again, people of color don't usually have that same access when it comes, particularly when it's compounded with lower socioeconomic status.
Yeah, so something that we're looking into was, the race distribution between like people who are disabled. And what's interesting is like at the nation level, Native Americans have the highest disability rate among working age adults, which is like 16%. And then we follow that with 11% are Black, white percent are, no, 9% is white, Hispanics is 7%, and Asians is 4%. And then go to the next slide. And then we were thinking like, oh, how do these different racial groups like look at disability? Or, how do they deal with disability? And when it comes to the Black experience with a disability, it's pretty interesting how, so like Black people make up 23.8% of the poverty population. And, that leads to a lot of economic disadvantages, social disadvantages, and, they're more likely than white people to have chronic health conditions. And, it's like hard for them to get access to services and like diagnosis for like any range of disability. Another thing that I think of is like when it comes to they're in poverty and they interact with the police a lot. And what's sad is like with the police, they are they are nearly 3 times more likely as 3 times more likely than white people to be killed by the police. And half of those people who are killed by the police are disabled, which is so disheartening. But it's because like when you think about it, is they already have the barrier of being Black, and then they have the barrier of being disabled. So they already have the prejudice and the racial biases against them. And then police are not like, they are not competency trained to be like to interact with someone with a disability. So if they see someone and it's they see them like interact and it's for them it's not compliant, and they see, oh, this person's a criminal, but in reality it's just maybe that person has a disability that that's invisible and they can't tell. And that's honestly an issue with like the police system, is they don't know how to deal with disabled people. And another thing I'm glad is in urban communities, which, a lot of Black people are in, there's a lot of crime and violence. And a lot of this violence can cause someone to become disabled. For instance, gunshot victims are actually 4 times more likely to become disabled. So I think it's just like, oh, that's crazy. And it's upsetting to see that, like, a lot of times, like, these racial groups, they kind of have to choose, like, oh, am I Black or am I disabled? Like, what's more important to me at the moment? Go to the next slide. So then I wanted to look, okay, well, what about the Latino experience? The Latino experience in Hispanic families, family is extremely important. And, a child's disability belongs to the whole family and not just to the child, which, leads them to be really overproductive and also could lead to like an independence issue for someone with a disability. We find that, like, a lot of for like Hispanics parents, they believe that, having a child with disability is either a punishment or a gift from God, which is like, it's very like reliance on religion. Some other things that like attribute like kind of like folklore reasons include premonitions during pregnancy, sins from the past, earthquakes, or like a scare during a pregnancy. And so, and then one thing that we can find is that because of well-defined gender roles, like men especially, they deny that they even have men, like they deny that they even have a disability. Next slide. So what we find is that in the Latino disability community, there's a lot of barriers that they face to like even access any like government services or accommodations. And like these barriers include, language, networking, like collaboration, advocacy, and communication. So in terms of advocacy, they're scared that if they advocate or if they even ask for accommodations, what if that, they're afraid that that affects with their legal status. And then like they're not used to like advocating for themselves. And we find that like in a Mexican American mothers, they believe that, like, their the education decisions should be made by the teachers and not them. But then that also leads to, like, during school, I don't know about you guys, but during school, my parents were the best advocates for me. So that's like, so if they have the belief that, oh, the teachers should be the ones deciding, then the child might not be getting what they actually need. And so, and then let's look at the Asian experience with disability. So, like, a disability. So in the belief of in the Buddhist belief of karma, they believe that disability is a punishment from the sins of past, or the sins of their parents, which is kind of similar to the Latin belief before. It's kind of sad. According to Asian tradition, mental illness would not qualify as a disability. So for them, like, what qualifies as a disability is, something that's medical, something that is seen. So if it's mental illness or invisible, it's not seen as a disability. It's seen as like a social condition. So therefore, they're not gonna seek help. They're not gonna seek like any like program help or any of that sense, because they view that this is not a disability. Mm. And then, so like for Asian culture, they really value, working hard, respect, saving face, like community oriented, doing things that won't disrupt the community. And because of these values, the ADA is kind of like controversial for them, because they view the ADA, well, obviously I'm saying like this is not for everyone, but this is just like some cultural beliefs. Because of the ADA, they believe that it's sort of like, because if you're taking the ADA, then you're being lazy. If you're taking accommodations, it's seen as like morally weak. And like a disability is seen as something to overcome. Like it's like if you're having a disability, it's like your inability to be a better person, and it's really sad. But like I've experienced this too, where like my sister, she works she works for like an autism therapy clinic, right? And one of her clients is South Asian, and you know they advise the mom to for the child to wear headphones, you know, like around just like to help them out. And but the mom won't do it because she says that because if the child wears headphones, then he's not going to look normal, and that is very important to, you know, like the Asian culture, like being normal is so important. That's why, like, you know how it's 4% of Asians are like 4% of the 4% of Asians are disabled. But I have a theory that that's honestly, I feel like that's not true. I feel like they're not just this, they're in denial that they're disabled, or they're just not seeking help. And it's like because it's a shameful thing, which is really sad and makes me really upset. But yeah. But if we go to
Sorry.
the Native American perspective, so according to the U.S. Census, 24% of, you know, American Indians and Alaska Natives have a disability. However, many American Indians and many American Indians and Alaska Natives are like either underserved, or, you know, they're just not able to receive like these programs. And these barriers are because of limiting access to services, lack of funding, personal shortages, lack of conditions among agencies, lack of consultation with tribes, and problems identifying persons eligible for the service. And so like when we see that, like, I think it's like a running trend, you know, like a lot of times like these other cultures just have a harder time accessing service. But what something is really kind of like heartwarming and uplifting in a way is that the way Native Americans view disability is quite progressive, which which is so cool. I thought this was so cool. But go to the next slide. But so what we find is Native Americans culturally, the way they view disability is that it's, you know, it's not like a problem. It's more because it's like because of a disharmony of the spirits. And for them, they can it's like through like their tribal traditions, they can get rid of that. So like once an individual like has done this, like done like a tribal ceremony for this, they're seeing that like, oh, there's harmony back in the spirits, regardless of like their physical appearance or their impairments. So for them, they don't view disability as like something to be fixed. It's just seen as like, oh, this is normal, which I think that is so progressive, and like I love that. And you know, one thing we find is that they are much more tolerant of like mental disabilities and disorders because, you know, they have this like deep cultural belief that altered mental states bring better connection to the bring better connection to the spirit world. This also comes with like the understanding that like different mental capacities bring new types of learning into a tribal community. I thought that was so cool. Like, and that something that we see so, you know, in media, like Native American culture is seen as so backwardsy, right? But like in reality, like the way they view disability is so progressive. Like for instance, they don't have a word for handicap, or they don't have a word for handicap, they don't have a word for cripple. And like if someone is mute, is not seen as like, oh, that's othering or it's bad. It's just seen as like, okay, like it's normal. So I thought this is like, I wanted to end in a lighter note. But yeah, I thought that was super cool.
And some like different ways that how like racism can directly impact disability. I think we see in terms of in communities of color that, you know, everyday different microaggressions can definitely have a negative impact on one's mental health and maybe even exacerbate already mental health conditions that are already present. I think we also see, especially when it comes to police brutality and different protest movements, and just direct violence because of race that can impact physical disabilities as well. And something that I should have put down is I feel like, particularly in the medical field, if medical professionals don't have adequate training into disability and race that, there's different myths that, like, for instance, that women of color can sustain more pain than white women can, and that can certainly be have quite a negative impact when it comes to somebody's disability experience. So I feel, those three things are certainly present in terms of how racism can definitely impact disability. And kind of some questions that we had for the group, and particularly for Jasmine. I guess I will stop sharing screen. Let's see here. The first thing, of course, we kind of generally went over stuff already, but how would you say, how does racism impact disability in what you've seen, Jasmine?
I'm like so honored that y'all think I know anything. So
you do.
So you said, how does racism impact disability? Is that what you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So a big question. I mean, I feel like there's so many different ways. Y'all have talked about some of them. I think a lot about how racism and ableism aren't like these separate things, right? When you look at the history of racism and ableism, they really developed next to each other. And even though it affects people who are abled and people of color, and it affects people, or or I guess you can see, for example, when you think of historical policies, there's, a lot of us know about the Jim Crow laws, right? Which is not one law, but a collection of laws, right? That discriminated against Black people. And there was also a collection of laws called the Ugly Laws. And those targeted disabled people, and they also targeted people who were in poverty and people who were seen as sexual deviants, right? And so that was sort of a law that made it kind of illegal for disabled people to inhabit public space, and certain kinds of disabled people. And I think that when I think about the Ugly Laws and I think about the Jim Crow laws, I don't think of them as two separate things, right? They really went together, and the people who were the most affected by that were Black disabled people, right? So it's if you're a disabled person, you're gonna probably experience some things that are not great. If you're a Black person, you're gonna experience some things that are not great. But if you're Black and disabled, then it's gonna be much harder to escape from any of that. I also think of it's the experiences of someone who is non-white and disabled versus the experiences of a white person who's also disabled, right? As with any intersectionality, it just changes things. It gives it more nuance, right? And other things can also bring that, class, right? So there's this, class can change things for a disabled person a lot, because I don't know if y'all feel this way, but I feel like it's very expensive to be disabled.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's I think also a lot about how some people's disabilities are taken more or less seriously on the basis of race, right? So for example, a lot of people who might be diagnosed with autism are instead diagnosed with schizophrenia or oppositional defiant disorder, right? Which has more of a stigmatized label, right? And so you find that labels that have more stigma, people of color are more likely to be associated with that label than white people. And that's not really the reality of anything, right? We shouldn't be afraid of people with mental illnesses, and we also shouldn't be afraid of people of color, but people really lump that together, whether or not it's true. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could talk forever, but I also want to make sure that there's time for other questions.
Indeed. I guess one of the other questions that we had was what are the different structural ways or infrastructure wise that the ADA is not inclusive to communities of color? Because it does seem to be given its kind of narrow definitions, it does seem to primarily benefit those who are wealthy and white.
Yeah.
So are you aware of the different
so I think
aspects?
there's the ADA really focuses on like physical conditions and like body disabilities, right? And but also like sort of like assumes that people have a lot of supports in a lot of ways. It assumes that people have access to diagnosis, access to healthcare to begin with, right? It assumes that, and because it's like you can't get really any accommodations unless you have a diagnosis. And if you can't access a diagnosis, then it's going to be much harder. And I think like, you know, what you were saying, Nayeli, earlier, was so my mom is from Taiwan, and I also don't think that Asian people have like less disabilities, but sometimes it can be more stigmatized to like seek mental help, right? And part of that is not just because of like Asian culture like hating disability, because I think that white culture and American culture also does that. But I do think that like, especially like when you think of the context of like, you know, like ADA focuses on a lot of like, it has a lot of assumptions like that you're a citizen, right? If you're undocumented and you're disabled, it's going to be really hard for you to get any kind of services, right? Any kind of help at all. I also think of like, you know, how there's certain like disabilities that again are like associated with people of color, like substance use disorder, even though that's not really accurate or reflective of like the reality. And things like substance use disorder are not included in the ADA. And I think of like, I like to think of like disability rights and disability justice as like kind of separate things, but that can go together, because it's like disability rights is sort of like, oh, we're disabled people, we deserve rights, right? Which like, yeah, but also like disability justice sort of takes that a little bit further and says, like, why are we in this situation anyway, right? That we are having to like advocate for crumbs, right? What about like the ways that we've structured everything make it really hard to do anything? I also think of like, so like, I think access to diagnosis is a really big one, like citizenship, and just like, I think also that a lot of because like the medical system is so white dominated, that there's a lot of like different kinds of like healing knowledge that may not be taken seriously by like the medical industrial complex, right? And some of that can, like some of the healing traditions can be ableist, just like some medical things can be ableist. And I think like, you know, one thing that I think about is how like Indigenous people in a lot of different communities of color have done a lot of work around like trauma for a very, very long time. And I've known things like mindfulness, right? Like long before white people ever figured that out. Right? Like, it's like all of this, like there's all these like therapies that white people are like, wow, like show stopping, like it's so new, right? But it's like, you know, like Buddhist monks are like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And
Yoga.
so
Meditation, yep.
yeah, and it's like, you know, like sometimes like mindfulness may not help everyone, because sometimes it's just like, okay, like I can't just like think my problems away, right? But it's like, I think like I just think a lot about how like there's a lot of like therapy things that are like based in sort of that knowledge but don't acknowledge that, right? And they've spent like a long time being like, oh, like or they spend a long time sort of talking about how like you know, like all these cultures are backwards and like they don't know anything and they believe in all of this like folk stuff, but then like turn around and use their knowledge and like make money off of it. And so it's like, it's really interesting, right? Because it's like, I notice like a lot, like I've had more like white people tell me like, oh, have you tried this like weird vitamin that no one's ever heard of, right? Then like I've heard people of color say that to me, right? Okay, I guess I'm trying to like, also I'm very rambly, so I'm like going in 30 different directions. But yeah, so like I guess like ADA is a really important policy, but it falls short in a lot of ways. And I think like when I think of like what like freedom and liberation and all that like stuff would mean for disabled people, I don't necessarily believe that it can be achieved through a policy alone, right? And I think that like a lot of people would think that, because it's like we have the ADA and it's one of the most advance like policies for disabled people in the world, and yet like we still see all of these statistics of disabled people suffering in the US. So yeah.
Thank you. Let's see here. Kind of just more of a general one, but how can the disability community be more inclusive, or like what are some different strategies or ways that the disability community can be more inclusive of racial minorities and vice versa?
I think like there's a lot of ways that could happen, but one way is just understanding that there is an aspect of our experience that overlaps. We don't have the same experiences, right? But it's like when I talk to, like, for example, like when I've had teachers of color, and I try and talk to them about my disabilities, even if they don't know all the language for ableism or like, you know, what all of that means, I don't really have to explain the concept of that to them, right? Like they're just like, oh, like people are shitty to you for no reason, makes sense. Like I experience that all the time, right? Or like not makes sense in that like that should happen, right? But they're just like, yep, it is what it is. And like, you know, and like you'll get, I think like it is difficult to like one thing that I think about also is that like I think, you know, in some of the disability like conversations, we have a lot of language around things that maybe not everyone knows, and it's really like it's really upsetting as, you know, like as like a disabled person, if somebody like calls me like something like that I don't want them to call me, right? Like if someone says like handicapped or something, I'm immediately like but also I think I have a little bit more leeway in a lot of cases when I'm trying to like build connections with people of color, because a lot of people either don't have access to that, like they don't have access to higher education, right, to even like begin to have these conversations, right? Because it's like, I don't know about y'all, but like for me growing up, I didn't hear about a lot of other disabled experiences until I got into college, right? I didn't hear from a lot of other disabled people who were like very open about their experiences until I got here. And I think about how much of a privilege that is every day, right? Because finding other disabled people, talking to other disabled people has like done so much for me. And so a lot of people, like, I think I try and like, when somebody's like saying something to me and it like makes me upset because I feel like it's ableist, I try and figure out whether what they're saying is ableist or like they're just using terms that are ableist, you know? Because a lot of people maybe are using those terms because they don't have any other alternatives. But if someone's like, you're a terrible person because you're disabled, I'm just like, okay, well, obviously we're not going to get along, right? But if someone's like trying to be nice to me and is trying to come like, or like is trying to be nice and kind and just doesn't have any alternatives, then like that's not good, but it's a different situation, right? There's like a different intention and motivation behind that, and there's like I feel like there's more of like a potential for that person to learn and grow, right? I think a lot about how like there are so many disabled people of color who don't identify as disabled because it is so hard to be a person of color, and it is so hard to be disabled. And so for a lot of people, it's like, why would you claim both unless you had to? And some people don't have that luxury or that choice, right? It's like some people, when you look at them, people will immediately racialize you, immediately see you as disabled. But for a lot of other people who maybe don't have visible disabilities or maybe don't have like, you know, where it's like, and I think, you know, like when you think of like the like police brutality and when Black folks are having a mental health crisis, it's never seen as a mental health crisis, right? Even if they are having a mental health crisis. And it's not to say that like police see mental health crisis, like treat mental health crises appropriately for white people either, but just that there is definitely a difference in how people are treated. Yeah, I think I don't know. So I guess like just wrapping it up, like realizing how much we have in common, how much of history we have in common, how much of like, I guess like one thing that I feel like links people of color with disabled people is that people have deemed us disposable, right? In various ways. And if we don't allow room in the disability community for those of us who live on all of those intersections, then our disability like advocacy and our disability activism is always going to be subpar, because we're never going to be able to reach everyone unless we're reaching the people who are suffering the most, right? Or who are the most impacted by these issues.
Definitely. I mean, I actually have one other question to ask, but I was curious if anybody else had any questions before it all. Okay, so I was actually curious. So I know that you, are you getting a master's in social work? I understand.
Yes.
Oh, no, sorry. I was like we had seen a picture of your bio, but I was curious, kind of moving into the direction of like resource allocation and service allocation. Like, how have social workers like tried to close that gap between being able to properly support people of color when there's like when wealth and race kind of dictate how much resources goes to who, you know?
So my short answer, and this is like a little off the record, but social workers don't do a very good job. Social work is very complicit in a lot of different things. And I don't know if any of y'all have had experiences with social workers, but part of the reason why I went into social work was because I had such shitty experiences with social workers that I was like, I can do better than you right now. And I think like with resource allocation, like one thing that I see as difficult, right, is that like, so nonprofits do a lot of really important work, and nonprofits were created to regulate like the flow of money, right, to like different communities. So it's like that way there are certain communities that can't get any help unless they go through a nonprofit. And then nonprofits, like the boards, usually have people who are in various business roles, who have some sort of investment in the way that services are carried out. And that can really affect the way that services are carried out. I just said that, but like, I guess also like social workers also don't do a very good job with disability, which you would think they would, because they are going to see so many people with disabilities. But I think like one example of like I think a lot about social work, like where it came from, and it came from it was founded by white women who wanted to save poor people and disabled people. And so that's sort of like the framework, even though there's been like a lot of like, there's been people who've tried to push back against that, but that is what social work is rooted in. And so that's what a lot of people within social work are fighting against all the time. People who maybe like are from those marginalized identities. So like, I'm like a person who's not white, who is queer, and who is disabled in many ways, right? And so that becomes very difficult as a social worker, right, to navigate those spaces. I also think of like the way that social workers treat neurodivergent people, like the autistic community, and ABA is like a cited like therapy intervention called applied behavioral analysis. But basically what it is it's actually created, the framework for it is created by the same person who created conversion therapy. And the idea is it's basically conversion therapy for autistic people. It's teaching people how to act as neurotypical as possible. And ABA has been shown to be really harmful. It's been shown to lead to things for autistic people like trauma, stomach issues, right? Because of the amount of stress that masking takes, right? And it's not just autistic people who mask, it's a lot of people, but also like, I think that autistic people face very specific challenges in having to deal with neurotypical people. So yeah, I think about ABA and how widely accepted that is in social work. It's very hard to find disability organizations that are run by disabled people for disabled people. It's a lot of times you'll see like people's like, it's like the moms, right? Or like the like family members or like advocates for people with disabilities, but disabled people never get to talk. So yeah, I think I again went on a like whole different direction, but I appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much. Whoa.
Thank you.
Do you have any like the article for the ABA? Because I'm really interested in that now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, it's like I don't have like one on me right this second, but I think like honestly like what like I feel like I've learned the most. Like I know I like read a lot of like books and articles and stuff, but like I learn the most from following other disabled people on like Twitter and like Instagram, right? Because especially like for disabilities I don't have. And I've realized that I had disabilities that I didn't know I had by following other people with other disabilities. And like I didn't know I was autistic until I started following people with autism, and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? Like and it was just like a really like wild like realization for me. But I can like send you, I feel like I have a lot of articles all the time, but I can send you like just like I can send you like lists of like people that I follow if you want, because like there's some really cool people. And I think especially like following disabled people of color on social media gives you a way to get that education without it feeling like work. And if you just like check up on their pages, like black disabled people are talking about their experience, right? Like people are talking about their experience. It's just hard to find, right? So you just need to find it and then follow it, and you need to make an intentional effort, right, to make that a part of the way that you understand disability, right? Because we can't be for disabled people if we're not for all disabled people.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Oh, does anyone have any questions to ask?
This isn't a question, but I just wanted to say that I like loved everything you said. Oh my god. Like that was like I was constantly just like, oh my god.
I'm so glad. Thank y'all for like having me. I'm so glad like also would you mind telling me how to pronounce your name just to make sure I'm not pronouncing it wrong? Is it Nayeli?
Oh, Niley.
Niley. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I'm so glad that Niley reached out to me because like I've been meaning to come to DASC or like get involved with DASC for a long time, but I was so intimidated because I was like, what if they hate me? But then
Oh my gosh,
no,
no.
that's never our goal to be intimidating. I think I hope that we're like the least intimidating people out there.
No, y'all are not intimidating as people. I was just like, wow, I value your opinion so much. I hope that I don't make a fool of myself.
Not at all.
But I really appreciated coming, and like if anyone has any more questions or wants to like email me ever, just like reach out. I can like drop my email in the chat if you want.
Also,
Awesome.
if you could drop like people to follow, like that would be really
yeah.
cool. Like, on, like,
okay, wait. So like I kind of lied. I don't have a Twitter yet because I'm afraid to get a Twitter because the world is terrible. But I follow a lot of people on Instagram who also have Twitters. Okay, this is my email. If anyone wants to like contact me for any reason, like I would welcome it. I would much rather read your email than like the email from my ableist professor. Sorry, as an aside. So this person, You Look Okay to Me, she is a spoonie and a Black woman, and talks a lot about her experiences. She has a lot of really cool educational material and I know she's on Instagram and I know she's on Twitter. There's also Crutches and Spice, which is a great handle, first of all. Crutches and Spice, her name is Amani Barberin, and she just is really great. She has like a pretty solid TikTok following, I think, and like makes TikToks about disabilities. So like if you're into TikTok, like go follow her. But she also has like Twitter and Instagram. There's also, I think this is the handle. This is her name, definitely, Mia Mingus. Mia Mingus does a lot of work in disability and also like transformative justice, if that's something that anyone here is interested in also. and she has a blog called Leaving Evidence, and she writes just a lot of stuff. She's like that. The blog is basically like, I need to leave evidence for disabled people because like we don't have that, like we don't have like access to our history and stuff. So I love a lot of her articles. Like she has one about the like access intimacy, which is like the name that she gives for like when you go somewhere and someone just like gets your access needs and you don't really have to like explain it, and you just feel this kind of like, you're just like, oh, like you get it, right? And I was like, no one's ever like had a name for that before, and I'm so glad. There's, I think it's, disability visibility. The person who runs that is Alice Wong. She's really cool. She's the one who started the campaign Crip the Vote. And
I've been reading articles by her for Nick's class.
Yeah, are you in one of Dr. Nick's classes?
I'm in Making Systems Work for Disability. I also want to eventually, I really want to take her disability and sexuality class at some point. Hopefully in person. So hopefully potentially next fall. But
yeah, I hope people take the pandemic seriously so I can leave my house. I'm just like, I'm immunocompromised and I'm like, I'm so sad. Anyways, we're all struggling, but I'm like, what other, I know that there's so many other people. There's like on Instagram, I don't know if they have like a Twitter or anything, but Fidget and Fries on Instagram is a Black autistic person. There's also, I don't know what their handle is, but there's somebody who does a lot of work for autistic people of color. Their name is Lydia X Z Brown, and they've done like a lot of different things. They like run Facebook groups and write blogs, and they do a billion things. And yeah, so those are some like, I feel like those are some good people to start with, because I feel like I would be here all night if I like kept listing people. But if you want more people, you can just send me an email. I can send you more people. But yeah, so there's also like Andrew Gerza, I forgot. Like I think he's one of the ones that like people know more, but like I guess like Andrew is not a person of color, but I do think that I do like what he has to say about disability and sexuality. And so he is a gay person or queer person, and like I think that he has a lot of really like important things to say about that. But yeah, so like I'm just like, I'm honestly like, I feel like someone was just like, you get to special interest right now, and I'm like, wow.
Oh, thank you so much. Wow. Okay, this is what I'm gonna do tonight. Look at all these people.
But thanks so much again for coming. It was amazing to have you.
Thank you so much. Also, like, does this happen every week, or does this happen? Okay, cool.
Yes, it does happen every week. I mean, technically next week's supposed to be more of a game night. We'll see how things go the day prior, if we just want to relax completely, because it's always midterm season, honestly. So, but otherwise, yeah, we're pretty much every week. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Also, if you're interested in more DASC meetings and just like general stuff, since we have your email, we can put you on our email list.
Oh, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Okay.
Honestly, like my biggest barrier to things is like literally just remembering that they're happening.
Well, good for you, because I always forget to send out the emails until like a few hours before the meeting. So like it's a quick reminder.
All right, so it's like 7 on Wednesdays, right?
Yes, yeah, and that might potentially change next semester, but for now, yeah, 7 on Wednesdays.
That is valid. Next semester, I will be I might be working with Dr. Nick.
Oh my gosh.
That's exciting.
Oh my gosh.
Exciting.
That's so exciting.
What a power duo.
I know, I'm so excited. Dr. Nick has really been there for me. Really cool. So awesome. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of y'all's night and weeks.
Yes.
Halloweens.
Have a good Halloween, everyone.
Yes. Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it.